If someone had told me 6 months ago that the loudest man on my street would end up being the quietest part of my life, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, of course. More of a short, sharp exhalation of air that passed for amusement in my meticulously curated, soundproofed world. My life was a fortress of routine, and Julian, my next-door neighbor, was the siege engine permanently parked outside my walls. He was a man made of noise. The guttural roar of his oversized truck starting at 6 in the morning. The thud of heavy boots on the shared porch. The loud, booming phone conversations he had in his yard, punctuated by laughter that seemed to shake the very windows of my apartment. He was a carpenter, a creator of sawdust and disruption, and I was a graphic designer, a curator of pixels and silence. We were oil and water. Fire and ice. A cliché I would have rolled my eyes at had I not been living it every single day. My observation of him was clinical, conducted from the safe distance of my second-story window. He was physically present in a way that I never was. Broad-shouldered, tall, with arms corded with the kind of muscle that comes from real work, not from a sterile, air-conditioned gym. His hair was an unruly mess of dark curls, often dusted with shavings that glittered like gold in the afternoon sun. He seemed to move with a thoughtless confidence, an ownership of the space around him that felt both arrogant and deeply compelling. Our interactions were a masterclass in minimalist communication. A curt nod as I scurried to my car. A grunt of acknowledgement as he hauled a slab of wood from his truck. The wall between our apartments was thin enough for me to hear the bass of his music, but it felt 1,000 miles thick. It was a barrier built of different lifestyles, different volumes, different ways of being in the world. And I was content with that. Or so I told myself. Loneliness can be a comfortable cage when you've designed it yourself. The bars are familiar. The lock is on the inside. You can convince yourself you're not a prisoner. You're a zookeeper. And my heart was a beast I was determined to keep contained. My days were measured in keystrokes and coffee cups. Wake up. Meditate for 10 minutes. Brew coffee. Work until my eyes blurred. Eat a pre-portioned lunch at my desk. Work again. A 30-minute walk, always the same route. Dinner. A book. Sleep. It was a loop, a perfect, self-sustaining ecosystem of solitude. It was safe. It was predictable. It was crushingly, soul-stoppingly lonely. Julian was the chaos element, the unpredictable variable. Sometimes he'd have friends over, and the sound of their combined laughter would seep through the walls, a language from a foreign country I'd never visited. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and resent them for it, a bitter, useless feeling that coiled in my stomach. I resented his ease, his ability to connect, his effortless occupation of the world. And in the quietest, most honest corners of my mind, I envied him for it. I wanted to know what it felt like to laugh like that, to exist so loudly that the world had no choice but to make room. Then came the storm. It wasn't a surprise. The weather alerts had been screaming about it for days, a menacing red blob crawling across the map on the evening news. I prepared for it the way I prepared for everything, with a list. Candles, check. Bottled water, check. Non-perishable food, check. Books I've been meaning to read, downloaded podcasts, a fully charged power bank. I was an island of preparedness, ready to weather the disruption with minimal deviation from my routine. The storm was just another form of noise I could shut out. The sky turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple-gray. The wind began to howl, a low, mournful sound that rattled the old window frames of my building. Then the rain came, not a gentle patter, but a solid, furious sheet of water, hammering against the roof and the glass. The lights flickered once, twice, a nervous stutter, and then they died, plunging my perfectly ordered world into a dim, flickering twilight. I lit my candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. It was almost peaceful. The disruption was contained. I was in control. That's when I heard the frantic banging. Not on my door. It sounded like it was coming from his side of the wall. A series of loud, frustrated thuds, followed by a string of curses that were perfectly audible through the plaster. I imagined him, a bull trapped in a china shop, raging against the inconvenience. A small, petty part of me felt a sliver of satisfaction. The great, confident Julian brought low by a bit of weather. Then the banging was at my door. Loud. Urgent. 3 solid knocks that vibrated through the wood. My heart, that frantic bird in my chest, beat its wings against my ribs. I never had visitors, especially not him. I stood frozen in my living room, candlelight flickering on my face, my mind racing. Ignore it. Pretend I'm not home. But the lie was ridiculous. My windows were glowing with candlelight, a beacon in the otherwise pitch-black building. He knocked again, harder this time. Now, I know you're in there. I can see the lights. Please, I need some help, his voice. It was different, stripped of its usual booming confidence. There was a raw edge to it, a note of desperation that I'd never heard before. Against my better judgment, against every self-preservation instinct I had, I walked to the door and unlocked it. The man standing on my doorstep was not the one I watched from my window. This version of Julian was drenched, his dark curls plastered to his forehead, rainwater streaming down his face and dripping from his chin. His t-shirt was soaked through, clinging to the hard lines of his chest and shoulders. But it was his eyes that held me. They were wide, dark, and filled with a desperate, humbling panic. He looked smaller, somehow, defeated. My roof, he said, his voice hoarse. The flat part over the kitchen. It's gone. The whole ceiling just came down. Everything's flooded. He ran a hand through his wet hair, flinging water across my welcome mat. He looked past me, into the warm, dry sanctuary of my apartment. Is there any chance I could just wait out the storm in here? On your floor? Anything. It's a mess in there. My fortress was being breached. The siege engine was no longer outside the walls. It was at the gate, asking for entry. Every alarm in my body was screaming. This was a violation of the established order, a catastrophic disruption of my routine. But looking at him, shivering and lost on my doorstep, I couldn't say no. The part of me that was human won out over the part that was afraid. Okay, I heard myself say, the words sounding foreign in my own ears. Yeah, come in. He stepped inside, and the space of my small apartment immediately shrank. He brought the storm in with him, the smell of rain and wet earth, and something uniquely him, a scent of sawdust and clean sweat that was overwhelming in the enclosed space. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, dripping onto my hardwood floors, looking profoundly out of place amongst my minimalist furniture and carefully arranged books. I'm sorry, he mumbled, gesturing at the puddle forming around his feet. I can take my boots off. It's fine, I said quickly. Don't worry about it. Here, I grabbed a towel from the hall closet and handed it to him. Our fingers brushed as he took it. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But a jolt went through me, sharp and hot, like a stray spark from a live wire. My breath hitched. It was the first time we had ever touched. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. He just scrubbed the towel roughly over his hair, his movements jerky and agitated. With the power out, the usual distractions were gone. No television to fill the silence. No phones to scroll through. No work to hide behind. There was just us, 2 practical strangers, trapped in the flickering, intimate glow of candlelight. The silence that fell between us wasn't comfortable. It was a physical weight, thick with unspoken questions and the howling of the wind outside. I watched him as he towered in my living room, looking around at my life. My sterile, organized life. He seemed to be taking in every detail. The color-coded bookshelf, the single piece of abstract art on the wall, the lack of any personal photographs. I felt suddenly exposed, as if my neatness was a confession of my emptiness. He finally broke the silence. You're really tidy. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, a statement of fact that highlighted the chasm between our 2 worlds. I could just imagine the comfortable, lived-in chaos of his own apartment, now a waterlogged ruin. I like order, I said, my voice tight. He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on my face. In the wavering candlelight, I could see things I'd never noticed from my window. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The tiny lines of exhaustion fanning out from the corners of his eyes. The way his jaw was clenched, a subtle tension that betrayed the calm he was trying to project. He wasn't just the loud, arrogant neighbor anymore. He was a person, a tired, stressed-out person whose home had just been destroyed. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it gave me vertigo. Out there, in the daylight world, he was the confident one, the one who took up space. But in here, in my domain, he was the one who was vulnerable. He was the guest, the refugee, and I, for the first time, was the one holding the power. I was the one with the dry floor and the warm towels. "Do you want some tea?" I asked, the offer surprising me as much as it probably did him. It was a gesture of domesticity, of care, that felt utterly alien to me. He looked surprised. Then a small, grateful smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines. "Yeah," he said, "that would be great. Thank you." I went into the kitchen and lit the gas stove with a match. My hands were shaking slightly. The simple act of making tea for another person felt monumental. I could feel his eyes on me from the living room, a heavy, curious gaze. I was acutely aware of every move I made, the clink of the mugs, the slosh of the water, the crinkle of the tea bag wrapper. It all sounded deafening in the storm-muffled silence. When I brought the mugs back, he was sitting on the edge of my sofa, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees. He looked immense and uncomfortable on my small, stylish furniture. He took the mug from me, his large, calloused fingers wrapping around the ceramic. I saw the network of small cuts and scars on his hands, a roadmap of his work etched into his skin. These hands built things, created things from raw wood. My hands only ever touched a keyboard and a mouse. "Thanks," he said again, his voice softer now. He took a sip, closing his eyes for a moment as if the warmth was a balm. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the storm and the soft clink of our mugs. "I hate storms," he said suddenly, his voice low. He was staring into his tea as if the future was written in the leaves. "Ever since I was a kid, my dad used to lock me in my room when I was bad, and one time he did it during a huge thunderstorm. I was maybe 7, sat in the dark for hours, just listening to the thunder. Felt like the world was ending. The confession hung in the air between us, shockingly intimate. It was a piece of his past, a shard of vulnerability offered up in the candlelight. This was the chink in the armor, the crack in the confident facade. The loud man was afraid of loud noises. The irony was not lost on me. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I couldn't imagine the terror. He shrugged, trying to dismiss it, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the mug. "It's stupid. I'm a grown man. It's not stupid to be afraid," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. It was the most honest thing I'd said to him, to anyone in a long time. He looked up at me then, really looked at me. His gaze was intense, searching. It felt like he was seeing past the tidy apartment, past the quiet exterior, and into the anxious, trembling core of me. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to look away. We were just two people in a dark room, sharing our fears. The wall between us, the one I had so carefully maintained, was crumbling. The hours passed in a strange, timeless haze. We talked. It started small, with the storm, the damage to his apartment, the incompetence of our landlord. But as the candles burned lower, the conversation drifted into deeper waters. He asked me about my work, and for once I didn't give the short, dismissive answer I usually gave to strangers. I found myself telling him about the satisfaction of finding the perfect font, the frustration of a client who didn't understand color theory, the quiet joy of creating something beautiful out of nothing. He listened. He didn't just wait for his turn to talk. He actually listened, his dark eyes fixed on me, asking questions that showed he was genuinely curious. He told me about his own work, the love he had for the smell of freshly cut cedar, the way a piece of wood could tell a story, the pride of building something with his own hands that would last for 100 years. We were both creators, just in different languages. Sometime after midnight, the conversation lulled. The storm had softened to a steady, drumming rain. The candles were burning low, casting our faces in a warm, intimate glow. "I was supposed to be on a date tonight," he said quietly, not looking at me. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Of course, a man like him would have dates. A string of them. Beautiful women who weren't afraid of his loudness, who probably found his confidence thrilling. The comfortable intimacy of our bubble was pierced by the sharp reality of the outside world. Oh, I set my voice flat. I took a sip of my now-cold tea. He shook his head slowly. I canceled it. This afternoon, before the storm even got bad, he finally looked at me, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. I didn't want to go. I was tired of it. Tired of what? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Pretending, he said. Pretending to be interested in small talk. Pretending I'm this simple, easygoing guy who just wants to have a good time. It's exhausting. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. All that noise I make, the music, the loud phone calls, it's just armor. A way to keep people from getting too close. From seeing that I'm actually lonely as hell. The confession was a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. Julian, lonely. The two words didn't seem to belong in the same sentence. But looking at him now, at the raw vulnerability in his eyes, I knew it was the truest thing he had ever said. And it resonated with a painful, perfect clarity deep inside me. He had just named the beast I kept caged in my own heart. Always thought you were. I started, then trailed off, unsure how to finish. Arrogant? Annoying? Completely content? A jerk? He supplied, a wry, humorless smile touching his lips. Yeah, I get that a lot. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. You know, I'd see you. Coming and going. Always so quiet. So self-contained. I thought you had it all figured out. This peaceful, ordered life. No drama. No noise. I was jealous. The world tilted on its axis. He was jealous of me? Of my empty, silent life? It was so absurd, so completely backward that I almost laughed. It's not peace. I whispered, the words feeling like they were being pulled from my soul. It's just quiet. There's a difference. He held my gaze. And in that moment, the space between us felt charged, humming with all the things we weren't saying. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the rain on his skin. My own breath felt loud in my ears. He moved slowly, deliberately, shifting closer to me on the sofa. My entire body went rigid. This is it. This is the moment where you run. Build the wall back up. Retreat to your fortress. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a terrifying, exhilarating hope. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently touched my cheek. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was unbelievably soft. A fire bloomed where his fingers met my skin, spreading through my veins, chasing away the cold I'd lived with for so long. Leo, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. It was the first time he'd said my name all night, and the sound of it on his lips was a revelation. He leaned in, and I closed my eyes. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like I would have imagined. It wasn't hard or demanding. It was slow, hesitant, a question. His lips were soft, tasting faintly of tea and rain. It was a kiss of profound, staggering gentleness. He wasn't taking anything. He was offering. He was asking for permission to see past my walls. And with a small, shuddering breath, I gave it. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. The frantic bird in my own chest finally grew still. The world outside, with its howling wind and relentless rain, ceased to exist. There was only the flickering candlelight, the warmth of his skin, and the quiet, miraculous meeting of our lips. It was a turning point, a fault line shifting deep beneath the surface of my carefully constructed world. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that nothing would ever be the same. I woke to the aggressive, unwelcome glare of morning sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was scrubbed clean and painfully bright. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind still thick with sleep and the lingering memory of warmth beside me. Then it all came rushing back. Julian, the candles, the confessions, the kiss. I sat up, my heart doing a nervous flutter. The apartment was silent. Too silent. The spot next to me in the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. A knot of pure, cold dread formed in my stomach. I got out of bed, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor, and walked into the living room. It was empty. The candles were snuffed out, their waxy remains like tiny tombstones on my coffee table. The mugs we'd used were washed and sitting in the drying rack by the sink. It was as if he'd never been here at all, except for the faint, lingering scent of rain and sawdust. And the note. It was a small piece of paper torn from my own notepad, sitting on the kitchen counter. For words, written in a strong, slanted script. Thanks for everything. Julian, that was it. Not, I'll call you not last night was amazing, just thanks. A polite dismissal. A thank you note for a stranger who had offered shelter from a storm. My mind, my cruel, over-analytical mind, began to spiral. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness for both of us. The storm, the darkness, the vulnerability, it was a fluke. An anomaly. He woke up in the harsh light of day, saw me, and regretted everything. He'd fled. He was embarrassed. He thought I was pathetic. The thoughts were a swarm of angry bees in my head, stinging and vicious. The fragile hope that had bloomed in the candlelight withered under the harsh glare of my anxiety. I had let him in. I had breached my own defenses, and this was the price. This cold, empty silence. This polite, dismissive note. I felt like a fool. A naive, lonely fool who had mistaken a moment of shared desperation for a genuine connection. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. The power came back on. The world returned to normal, but my own world felt fractured and wrong. My routine, once a source of comfort, now felt like a punishment. The silence in my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was an absence, a gaping, Julian-shaped hole in the fabric of my life. Every time I heard his truck start, my stomach would clench. Every time I heard footsteps on the porch, I would freeze, listening, hoping. But he never knocked. We had exchanged numbers at some point during the night, a hopeful, modern ritual. My phone remained silent. I would pick it up, stare at his name in my contacts, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I couldn't do it. My pride, or what was left of it, wouldn't let me. I'd opened the door once. I couldn't stand at it now, begging. I saw him once from my window. He was in his yard, clearing away fallen branches, his back to me. He moved with his old confidence, his shoulders set and strong. He looked exactly like the man he'd been before the storm, the loud, intimidating stranger. It was as if the vulnerable man who had confessed his fears in my living room had never existed. Maybe I had imagined him. Maybe the whole night had been a dream, a feverish hallucination brought on by low air pressure and loneliness. The solitude I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a prison cell. The bars were cold and hard, and the lock was no longer on the inside. I had tasted connection, real connection, and being cast back into my old life was unbearable. The quiet wasn't quiet anymore. It was the sound of rejection. On the third day, I had convinced myself to let it go, to rebuild my walls stronger this time, to forget the feel of his hand on my cheek, the taste of his lips, the impossible heart-stopping hope. I was at my desk, trying to force myself to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of pixels and hex codes, when there was a knock on the door. Not a loud, urgent banging like during the storm. Just a soft, hesitant rap. 3 quiet knocks. My entire body went still. It couldn't be. It was probably just a delivery or the landlord. I told myself not to hope. Hope was a dangerous, treacherous thing. I walked to the door on numb legs, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. I looked through the peephole. It was him, Julian. He stood on my porch, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess in a way that didn't look careless, just unkempt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I took a deep breath and opened the door. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, thick and awkward. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his own feet. Finally, he pulled one hand from his pocket. He was holding a small terracotta pot, and it was a tiny, slightly pathetic-looking succulent. He held it out to me like a peace offering. I, I'm sorry, he mumbled, his gaze still fixed on the floor. For just leaving. That was a jerk move. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, my heart a confused, aching mess. He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading vulnerability that mirrored the night of the storm. I freaked out, he said, his voice raw. Okay. I woke up, and it was light out, and you were there, sleeping, and you looked so peaceful. And it was all real. It wasn't just the storm. And it scared the hell out of me. He took a ragged breath. I've never felt like that. With anyone. It was good. Too good. And my first instinct, my stupid, broken first instinct, is always to run when something is good. I thought I was running from you, but I was just running from myself. I've been a wreck for 2 days. I haven't slept. I can't stop thinking about you. The confession washed over me, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The swarm of bees in my head went silent. The cold knot in my stomach dissolved. He wasn't rejecting me. He was just as scared as I was. And in that moment, I found a sliver of bravery I never knew I possessed. I thought you regretted it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I thought it was a mistake. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. No, he said, his voice firm, urgent. God, no, Leo. It was the only thing that's felt real in a very long time. He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. Can I come in? I stepped back and opened the door wider. He came inside, bringing that same overwhelming presence with him, but this time it didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like a homecoming. He walked over my windowsill, the one that caught the best morning light, and placed the small, sad succulent there. It needs a lot of sun, he said softly, turning to face me. And a stable home. His eyes held mine, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the plant. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a single, newly cut key. It gleamed in the light from the window. He held out to me, his palm flat. This is for my place, he said. The roof is getting fixed tomorrow. It's not much, but it's dry again. I want you to have this, in case your roof ever leaks. Or, for whatever, it was so much more than a key. It was an offering of trust, an invitation, a promise. My hand was shaking as I reached out and took it from him. The metal was cool against my skin. I closed my fingers around it, the sharp edges pressing into my palm. It felt solid, real. Julian, I said, his name feeling right in my mouth. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides and framed my face with his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. His touch was no longer hesitant. It was sure. It was certain. I'm not running anymore, he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. I'm done with the noise, and he kissed me. Not the questioning, gentle kiss of the storm, but a kiss of fierce, unapologetic certainty. It was a kiss that spoke of sleepless nights and regret, of terrifying hope and a future I had never dared to imagine. And I kissed him back, my hands coming up to grip his arms, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control. I was holding on to my new beginning. The following weeks were a process of gentle acclimation. We were 2 different species learning to occupy the same habitat. His world began to bleed into mine, and mine into his. It started small, a pair of his heavy work boots left by my door. My favorite brand of tea appearing in his kitchen cupboard. A new routine began to form, one that wasn't rigid or lonely, but fluid and shared. Some mornings, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee already brewing, and I'd find him in my kitchen, hair still messy from sleep, a soft smile on his face as he handed me a mug. Other times, I'd use my key, letting myself into the quiet of his apartment while he was at work, and leave a book I thought he'd like on his nightstand. His apartment was the opposite of mine. It was full of comfortable clutter, half-finished projects, and the rich, permanent scent of cedar and sawdust. It was a space that felt lived in, loved in. And slowly, my own sterile apartment began to change, too. The sad little succulent he'd given me was thriving on the windowsill. A ridiculously comfortable armchair he'd built himself now sat in the corner of my living room, disrupting my perfect minimalist lines in the most wonderful way. There was a photograph on my bookshelf now, the first one I'd ever displayed. It was of the two of us, taken on a whim at the beach, squinting into the sun, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us laughing. Really, truly laughing. We learned the rhythm of each other's silence. We could sit in the same room for hours, me working on a design at my laptop, him sketching out a plan for a new cabinet, and the quiet wasn't empty. It was full. It was a comfortable, shared space, woven together by the soft scratch of his pencil and the click of my mouse. He taught me that silence didn't have to be a wall. It could be a bridge. One evening, we were lying in my bed, the window open to the cool night air. The only sounds were the distant chirp of crickets and the steady rhythm of our breathing. His arm was a warm, heavy weight across my chest, his head resting on my shoulder. I could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against my ribs. I thought back to the man I used to be, the one who watched the world from a window, who cataloged his neighbor's noises as disruptions, as threats to his carefully controlled peace. That man wouldn't recognize the person I was becoming. This person who leaned into touch instead of flinching from it. This person whose heart no longer felt like a trapped bird, but like something soaring. The storm didn't just break the power on our street. It broke down the walls I'd spent a lifetime building. Julian, the chaos element, the man made of noise, hadn't destroyed my world. He had cracked it open and let the light in. He wasn't a disruption to my life. He was the beginning of it. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the beautiful, chaotic, wonderful storm that had washed everything clean and left behind something new. Something real. Something worth holding on to. He was right. Quiet is different from peace. My old life was quiet. This was peace. And it makes me wonder, have you ever had a storm in your life? A person or an event that you thought was a disaster, that turned out to be the very thing that saved you? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more about the quiet moments that can make the loudest impact in a life, please don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more stories to tell.